Hi folks, this is Klaus at Top Hydraulics. We're going to show you today how to replace the convertible top hydraulics on a mid-90s Mercedes E-Class. By replacing, we mean we show you how to remove the trim, get access to the cylinders, take them out and put them back in or put in replacements if you do a core exchange. Now the mid-90s Mercedes E-Class is an awesome car. It's very solidly built in Germany and it has become a collector's item with prices soon approaching original purchase price on very well kept models. This particular one here is a 95 E320 Lawrencer. In the US there were the models made are the 95 E320 and also the 93 through 94 300 CE. In other countries there are other models going back to as early as 92. So here we have the layout again of the hydraulic system on the E-Class convertible. We've left out the hoses and we've left out the roll bar lift cylinder and its two latching cylinders. What we're having here is roughly in the way they're laid out in the car from front to rear. We have 8 cylinders, that is the 2 main lift cylinders that do the lifting of the soft top. We have the 2 fabric bow tension cylinders that raise and lower the rear window section of the soft top. We have the case cover lock cylinder inside of the case cover lock. We have the rear bow lock cylinder inside of the rear bow lock, and we have the 2 tonneau cover lift cylinders that raise and lower the storage cover or tonneau cover. We also have the pump here, which is in the front right corner of the trunk, and we have 3 valves laid out here. These are the valves that divert the fluid from the pump to the various cylinders. These valves are located below the storage cover, accessed when the storage cover is open and you take the liner out. And we have here the roll bar cylinder that diverts the flow to the latching and raising part of the hydraulic roll bar or tombstone. So what can go wrong on these parts? The hydraulic cylinders each have on average 6 or 7 seals in them, which do decay with time, in particular the polyurethane rod seals, and there are also gland seals on top and on the bottom, and very importantly there are port seals where the hoses go into the cylinders. The port seals have been neglected by many in the past and they are starting to fail, and those seals have to be replaced and upgraded. What can go wrong in a valve? There are multiple things. There are some internal valves in these aluminum blocks, and of course there are the solenoids on top, which can fail in various ways, electrically, or they can get clogged, or they can have bad seals inside, or bad metal parts inside. And lastly, what can go wrong on the pump? Again, multiple things. This is a very high performance pump. It's very well made and accordingly quite expensive to buy new. This is a gear pump, and gear pumps are very reliable except when they get contamination in them. And you might think my fluid isn't dirty. Well, what happens over time is the seals in the cylinders slowly decay. Parts of the seals get suspended in the hydraulic fluid. You'll notice probably that the fluid in your reservoir is a little dark, and this dark suspended stuff sinks to the bottom, turns into sludge. The sludge going through the gear pump wears out the gear pump, and ultimately it will not perform very well anymore. Just for completeness, here's a shot of the storage cover open, and I can point out the location of most hydraulic system components. A storage cover lock with its cylinder is here. We have the rear bow lock mounted inside under the storage cover. We have the fabric bow tension cylinders on the left side and right side. You can just see the top of it here. We have the main lift cylinder that you cannot see. It's currently roughly in this position, mounted in front of the rear wheel, going way down behind the rear windows. We also have the storage cover lift cylinders roughly in this position, accessible from the trunk. And we have the valve blocks inside the storage cover, actually behind the trim, one down here, one down on the other side. And the roll bar system actually is mostly on the left side. If you imagine this roll bar being up, the roll bar cylinder would be roughly this big, roughly in this location, just a bit farther down, and below the roll bar cylinder is the roll bar valve. Also, there are a couple lock pawl cylinders that release the roll bar locking mechanism. And lastly, of course, we still have the pump in the trunk. If you were to follow the direction of this pointer, that's roughly where it is, in the far forward right corner of the trunk. To remove the rear bow lock, we first remove the cover. That's simple, just 12 10mm hex head bolts, and pop off the cover, then unbolt the rear bow lock and remove the hydraulic lines. So here's the rear bow lock exposed with the cover already removed. To take the rear bow lock out, you would be removing 3 more 10mm hex head bolts, and you would be unplugging the wiring harness. This is a friction fit, so you just wiggle and pull, and you remove the hydraulic hoses by just sticking like a small 1/8" flat screwdriver into the bend of the clip, pushing it down. Once the clip is slid out of the way, you can just pull the hydraulic hose out of the cylinder. Now, the rear bow lock cylinder is important to take care of in a timely manner, because if you have a tremendous leak from this cylinder, you will not be able to unlock the rear of the top with a hydraulic pump anymore, and you'll have to apply a lot of tricks to get the top open. So here we've replaced already the rear bow lock, and I'm showing again the case cover lock and the rear bow lock to make an additional comment. I know that some people are very limited by budget, or feel that way, and don't think that they can or cannot afford to do the whole system replacement. So if you want to tackle this piece by piece, that is okay. Again, it's very important that the rear bow lock be properly taken care of, because there's no way to manually unlock the top if the rear bow lock is leaking badly, or if other cylinders in your car are leaking badly and the pump cannot build enough pressure to extend this cylinder. Also, once the cylinder leaks badly, there will be fluid puddling inside this cover, and ultimately it will be running down into the storage compartment, and you'll be lucky if it misses your expensive canvas. So it really is best to do this job right. Now, there are folks online who are trying to peddle do-it-yourself kits to rebuild these cylinders. There is actually no such thing as a do-it-yourself rebuild, because you cannot get all the seals for the cylinder, and to do a rebuild you have to replace all seals. It really needs to be done. The port seals where the hoses go in will go bad, and this is absolutely not a do-it-yourself replacement. They require special seals that Top Hydraulics molds especially for these cylinders. There are special rod seals. Don't ever do O-rings. They are a very short-term fix if they work at all, and most people actually damage their cylinders when they try to do a do-it-yourself repair on these cylinders. Doing a core exchange with Top Hydraulics does not break the bank. If you want to do a bare minimum we would suggest that you get the rear bow lock and the storage cover lock paired together while you're in here. These are easy to get to. The seals in these two cylinders roughly fail at the same time, so that's a fairly easy do-it-yourself fix if you want to tide yourself over for a while. Okay, here we have the case covers lock or storage cover lock. To get access to it is pretty simple. We have two Phillips screws on the outside here, and we have two 4mm Allen bolts to remove. With these bolts removed, the top trim piece comes off, and ultimately we can fold the inner lining of the storage compartment forward. Later on, for access to the valve blocks, we'll be removing some rivets that hold the lining in place throughout the storage compartment. There's something like a dozen of these rivets that are also used in the trunk, and I'll take a moment here to explain how they work. The rivet style taps, as if the inner part is pushed in, the outer part expands. So all you really need to do is get a screwdriver, or if you're really fancy, special removal tool to pull the inner part of this tab out. And even at this point, the tension is gone on the outer part, and you can pull the tab out of your trim piece. Here's the exposed case cover or storage cover lock assembly. It's mounted with 3 bolts that you remove that have 10mm hex heads, and after that you only have to disconnect the wiring harness and pull the clips for the 2 hoses. The one little trick for the wiring harness is this connector here is again a friction fit, and it's a little hard to pull on, so you could stick a small screwdriver in here, loosen it up a little bit, and pull the connector out. I have a few comments about part numbers stamped on Mercedes hydraulic cylinders, also about the hose numbers and about hose installation. And this refers to Mercedes R129 SL class cylinders and latches, as well as the 208 CLK class and the 124 E-Class. All the cylinders for these cars have the part number stamped onto the cylinder. For example, here's a 124 800 0372. And this cylinder, by the way, was made in 1995. W15 means the 15th week of 1995. You will also see that the cylinder has on it hose number stamp that is 37 on top, 54 on the bottom. It is a very good rule of thumb that the odd hose number is always closer to the cylinder shaft, and the even hose number is on the bottom or farthest away from the moving shaft. You will also see on latches, for example on this one, 124 750 0684, that's the part number of the latch. It actually has a cylinder in it that's a 129 800 0072, but you cannot see that part number since the cylinder's in the latch. Interestingly though, the hose number, the number of the hose that goes into the cylinder, is stamped onto the housing of the latch. There's a 31 on this end and a 32 on this end. So here we have a line 31, and I want to show you in more detail how it is installed. Of course, we have the hydraulic line clip, and you notice that the hose fitting has a bulge about 3/8 inch from the end, or 8mm, and this hose goes all the way into the cylinder. It goes into the hole that the brass fitting with the port seal behind it is in. So you push the hose in all the way. Next, the hydraulic line clip has a barbed end that is a little bit wider. You put the barbed end into the cylinder's rail, push the clip in all the way, and the line is secured. If you were to accidentally put this clip in the wrong way, meaning barbed end up, it slides in pretty easily, doesn't it? And you think it's secure, but as soon as the cylinder is pressurized, the hose will come out and be squirting fluid out. So always put the barbed end into the rail first. Here's the driver's side bow extension cylinder or fabric bow tension cylinder mounted next to the main lift cylinder. You notice the main lift cylinder shaft fully extended because the top is currently up. The bow tension cylinder is mounted with two 6mm pins. One on top has a circlip on it. One way on the bottom is fastened with a pin that has a thread on one end and a T30 Torx head. We've already put a Torx wrench on the bottom of that bolt so that you can see it more easily in this video. And I'd like to point out that that Torx head is awfully close to the shaft of the extended main lift cylinder. In order to avoid damaging the shaft of the main lift cylinder, in case you have a slipping tool down there, you may want to unhook the top of the main lift cylinder, take the clevers out, push the shaft in, or put a protective sleeve around the cylinder, or tackle the bow tension cylinder while the main lift cylinder is already removed. Note also that we have run the rear window up for easier access to that bottom mounting bolt. So I will stick my hand in here, act as if I am still fully unscrewing this bolt, pull it out to show it to you. Here's our mounting pin for the bow extension cylinder with a T30 Torx head. The top pin has a circlip on it that is probably most easily removed. I'll show you on a model here by putting a small flat screwdriver into the gap of the circlip, turning it a little bit, and the circlip is off. You might have this circlip flying around because they pop off fairly easily. If so, Top Hydraulics supplies a bunch of spare circlips anyway. To put this circlip back on later on, you simply put it on so it rests vertically on top. It's best to put a dab of grease on there so it doesn't move around that easily before you can even get a tool on it, and then you just push straight down. And you have to push straight, otherwise it won't work. There we go. And the clip is back on. Let's take this clip off. There we go. It did not go flying. I caught it. Now you will notice that there's not enough room to pull the cylinder off all the way. You first have to lower the rear bow a little bit so there's more room around here. Now we can pull the cylinder off, and lastly just remove the hoses, put in the new cylinder, put the new cylinder back in straight onto this pin, and install everything in reverse order. The fabric bow extension cylinder on the right side, passenger side, is identical to the one on the left side, except that it has a switch mounted on it, easier shown here. That switch is attached with 3 screws, and there's one more screw for the wire guide on top of the cylinder. So after you have removed the cylinder from the car, you will find that the wiring harness for this switch is down, going through the firewall into the rear seat area, and you have to either remove the internal trim, which you have to do anyway later for main lift cylinder removal, or you can simply remove the switch from the cylinder and take the cylinder out, put the replacement back in that way. For access to the main lift cylinders, we need to remove the rear seat bench, rear seat back, interior quarter panels, and a little cover inside. So let's start with the rear bench. We have already removed the pin that holds this hinge cover to the mechanism on the frame. In order to pull that pin, you simply put a screwdriver in this circlip, pull the pin, and the rest of the mounting will come out. And obviously you have to reinstall that when you put the panel back in later. So back to the seat bench. We start on the bottom. The bottom seat bench is actually only clipped into place. There's a push pin on this side and the same on the other side. We push the pins in, and the bench lifts up. We lift and work the bench up to go past the seat belt buckle. Take the bench out. The seat back is fairly easily removed. You want to move down the armrest and feel all the way up in the corner here. You'll see an 8mm hex head sheet metal screw, one in this corner, one in the other corner. Get those screws out. Flip the arm up again, and now you will have to lift the back up straight. It can be a little bit hard to shake it loose at first, so be patient. Pull up, pull up, pull up, pull up, pull, 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 and here we go. The whole secret was that these metal pieces were going in some guides, and they take a little bit of force to pull up. Down here, by the way, we have the roll bar controller that reacts to sensors on the rear axle, as well as having an internal accelerometer if it detects that the car is accelerating abnormally fast or has an impact, or if the rear axle is in the air, then it will deploy the roll bar or tombstones. So the rear seat bench is out. Now it's time for the interior quarter panel. There's a 10mm hex bolt right behind this hinge that needs to be loosened. Plus we have 3 hex bolts for the chrome trim piece in the corner up here. And then we have 4, not hex bolts, these are Phillips bolts. Then we have 4 Phillips bolts that we already removed. 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, and 1 here. With these bolts out, we have also already pulled the guide of the seatbelt extender, and this will allow us to now pull the interior quarter panel up. We have to pull fairly hard and straight to get this out of some tight-fitting clips that hold the chromed trim in place here, right behind the rear window. We pull up, we manage the seat belt, and keep moving, massaging, pulling. There we go. And we want to put something soft under this trim panel, so we don't even have to remove the seat belts, and we can just lay this panel flat down on the floor. And this now gives us access to the lower mounting pin on the main lift cylinder right behind this rubbery cover here. So the main lift cylinder is situated something like this right now behind the sheet metal, between the sheet metal and the rear window, and we're trying to remove the one mounting pin on the inner side. That mounting pin is accessible through this access hole. It's the whole reason we removed that interior quarter panel. Takes a tight-fitting T40 Torx bit and a little bit of torque, and it's loose. So this one was really easy to remove. There are some stories of cars that have been through rough times, or it's been very moist inside, where these bolts have corroded, or somebody didn't use a tight-fitting Torx wrench and this bolt was stripped. Now that's a little bit tough if these bolts strip, because Mercedes does not currently make them. So if you strip it, you have to find a way to get it loose. One thing you could do is machine a notch in here and try to get it loose with an impact driver and a flat bit in it or something similar. And worst case, you'd have to have somebody machine a bolt like this. It's pretty straightforward if you know how to do it. So as you pull this bolt out, be sure that you don't drop it into the quarter panel, otherwise you'll need a long magnet to retrieve it. We take this bolt out, then we lift the top again to remove the matching bolt on the other side. That time, of course, we need a shorter ratchet, and we need to lift the rear window to get access to that same bolt on the other side. Remove the other bolt. Again, there are two bolts pinching the cylinder in place, and if you remove the other bolt accessed through the storage area, you can pull the cylinder out with the hoses on the bottom, and then remove the hoses, and you put the replacement back in. So we'll show you today how the roll bar system works on a Mercedes 124 E-Class, meaning mid-90s E-Class. It's similar on a CLK 2.8 chassis, late 90s, early 2000s. We've removed the seat bench and seat back, and you see here the roll bar controller 124 820 5826, the soft top controller 124 820 4526, and here's the big roll bar assembly 124 860 1032. It's got the roll bar valve 124 800 1678, and it's got behind it the roll bar lift or roll bar support cylinder. Also hidden here at the end of these hydraulic lines are two brass colored lock pole cylinders. Those look like big brass hex nuts. They have small hydraulic cylinders in them, lock pole cylinders that actually unlock the latching mechanism when the roll bar goes up. So how does this whole thing work? Best way to demonstrate is by making it emergency deploy. Let's have some fun. We have already unbolted the soft top, not the soft top, but the roll bar controller, made sure that the ground wire is attached, turned on the ignition, put the car in gear. Now if we shake this controller and imitate a collision that way, it will make the roll bar go up. The other thing that can make the roll bar go up is a sensor on the rear axle, if the rear axle is in the air. So again, ignition on, car's in gear, we're going to shake this controller and the roll bar is going to go up. So What happened is we got some heavy duty springs in this roll bar assembly that push the rear headrests up, and they can push them up quickly because the hydraulic roll bar lift cylinder has been emergency decoupled from the system. It's actually the cylinder that has held the roll bar assembly down before. Now we had done emergency deployment, and that emergency deployment applied some voltage onto the solenoid on the actually the solenoid is back here on the end of the cylinder, and here's another cylinder just to show you the solenoid. It gets voltage, and once that voltage is applied, this color goes up, and that allows the catch of the roll bar system that is normally held down coupled to this roll bar cylinder to get released. So now being released from the cylinder, the springs push up the headrests. How do we get the headrests down? One thing is we need to release the two ratchets that you heard, which are actually the lock pawl cylinders. When they get pressurized, they release the ratcheting mechanism, and at the same time we'll get fluid into the bottom of this lift cylinder, and that will make the cylinder catch up again to the pin that hooks into the top of it. So we push the roll bar up button, the roll bar support cylinder comes up, you hear it clicking, latching. Now while we push the down button, at the same time the lock pawl cylinders release and the roll bar lift cylinder pulls down. If you want to remove the roll bar lift cylinder, best way to get it unhooked from the heavy roll bar support is to do this emergency deployment. So here's the roll bar valve. We have the supply line number 10 going in on the bottom. We have a return line 14 going back to the pump, and various lines going to the two lock pawl cylinders and the top and bottom of the roll bar support cylinder. In order to take the valve out, we don't have to do all that much. We unbolt the 8mm fitting for the return line. We loosen two 10mm hex nuts behind the frame that hold the valve in place. We pull the black retaining tabs, turn retaining discs. Watch out that we don't get too much fluid squirting in our face, because we just played with the whole system, and we pull the hoses out. And lastly, we pull out the connectors on the solenoids by pushing up on one end and twisting a screwdriver on the other. That is the easiest way on these connectors without chipping and breaking them. And there we go, have the wires disconnected, nuts removed in the rear, and all hoses off, and we can just swap in a new valve. So here we are, here's the duplicate cylinder. We have pulled the hairpin out here, pulled the hairpin out here, and we are now dislodging the bottom this way with a large screwdriver. We're dislodging the top same way, just levering it off the ball joints. Next we pull the hydraulic lines by levering small screwdriver into the clips, pulling the clips back and pulling out the hoses. Here we go. I don't want to spill anything right now. So we take the old cylinder out, put in a new one. Let me put the hose right back on here as if this was the new cylinder already. With the barbed side into the rail first. Push the line in. Front ball mount, push it on. Rear ball mount, push it on. Pin back in. and same in the front, and the cylinder's back in place. For access to the pump, we've already removed 4 Phillips screws to take this sheet metal cover off, and we have already loosened 3 10mm hex head bolts that hold the pump down, and we can now lift the old pump out. Note that the pump is in the rear, mounted with 2 spacers under the mounting frame, so you want to get those back into place. Also note that there's 2 different versions of the same pump with the same part number. They're fully interchangeable. So to swap pumps, you don't have to do a whole lot. You loosen the 8mm hex fitting for the roll bar valve. You take out the 11mm hex fitting for the main hydraulic valves, and you swap the cap, so the return filler cap. So let's do that first. Put it in the new pump. Take these 2 hoses off. Put them into the new pump. There's no way to mix things up. Everything can go only in one place. And lastly, we pull the connector, wiring plug connector off, put it on the new pump, and now we can commission the system. We don't even have to put the pump back into the trunk, because we want to, well, let's first connect it here. We want to fill the pump with fluid. Of course, we tighten these lines. We fill the pump at least to maximum. If we've taken the cylinders out before and there's air in the system, then the pump will operate the system, but the first 2 to 3 cycles will be a little bit fast in some points of the movements, because there's still air in the system, but all the air eventually makes it back through the return line here into the reservoir. So again, we fill the pump at least to the maximum line, cycle the top. As the top goes forward, we want to go slow, stop a few times, because the first time around, if you have replacement main lift cylinders in there or air in the main lift cylinders, the top will tend to slam onto the windshield, and you don't want that. If you catch the top moving too fast and you just catch it in the last moment before it hits the windshield, that's where you can create pressure spikes in the system that are not too good. So you want to go a little slow on this, and again, after a few cycles, all the air will be back into the reservoir. The system is fully self-venting. Lastly, there can be one slight complication, that is the case cover or tonneau cover lock will sometimes develop an airlock in it and accidentally go shut again after it has just opened. In order to remedy that, you just have to manually cycle it with a wrench, and everything should be good again. Having replaced the whole system, meaning all the cylinders, the valves, and the pump, this car should be good to have a working top for the next 30 to 50 years. Okay, so here we are. We've swapped all the hydraulic components for this convertible top. That's the cylinders, the valve blocks, and the pump, in less than a day. We don't normally work on cars. I'm not a mechanic, and yet we've shot this video, taken several shots over again, and I even had time to get my hair cut, and it's still taken us less than a day. So with the help of this video, we hope that any reasonably handy person can actually do the same job in the day as well. Let's see if it works.